So how can you see slides and everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Coolio. So I'll give it 1 more minute and then I'll just start. I guess I should just randomly say welcome to people, even though I cannot see if anyone is joining right now. But welcome. I'm very happy to have you here. Okay, guys, I have a bit over 4 o'clock, so I think I'll start now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sebastian, and I'll host this INFOStudio webinar about service design. It's great to see that many signups and interest in the subject. And one of the reasons for doing this is that there's a lot of discussion on service design today. And we want to contribute to that with our knowledge and show in a more practical sense how it can be applied to a variety of challenges. Besides that, everyone is just sitting at home and attempting to anticipate what the post-COVID-19 world will look like, but nobody can know for sure at the moment. What we do know is that user needs and expectations for online services and remote experiences are changing as we speak. This, of course, sparks new complex challenges that service design can help adapt to and design for. So today you will learn a bit about the basic principles, and we will share our take on applying service design and how it helps ensure overview to create coherent experiences and provide value even when looking at projects that differ quite a bit in assignment. So this webinar is generally intended for designers looking to learn more about service design and how we apply it, but also for product and innovation managers as we get into organizational challenges and strategies for getting digital products and services successfully out into the world. So some parts might be recognizable for you today, and some parts might be new. So to inform a bit about today's format, this webinar will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. If you have any questions, we will be doing Q&A sessions after each of the cases. Now, to shortly introduce the people you'll be seeing today, we come from all over Europe in good collaborative design fashion. So first is Joy, who's a Dutch designer. They'll talk a bit about OV-fiets rental bike. And Laura, a Spanish designer from Madrid, who will talk about the Adyen Career Hub. And they will join me in a few minutes. I myself am a Danish designer from Copenhagen, and I lead the design team at our company. Before we get into the details of service design, I would just like to say a few things about who we are and how we work. So Info is a full-service tech and innovation agency and have for 25 years been helping clients create successful innovations and end-to-end solutions, where we have a history of helping with the development and products of services from initial vision to implementation. So how does end-to-end look like for us? Well, at a glance, our proposition goes from high-level advisory to design-led strategy to delivery in a cyclical manner, depending on the type of challenge we're facing. End-to-end for us then means that we're part of everything from early exploration and resource to initiating innovation processes to, in the end, delivery, where we combine design, lean, and agile working methods to develop digital products and services. So how does service design fit into what we do? Well, many companies have in recent years gone through digital transformations or shifted from a product vision to more of a digital service vision. And this can create internal challenges or a need for framing new opportunities and having evidence for which direction to go in, which is where service designers come in and facilitate change by helping shape new experiences and propositions while preparing the necessary organizational structure to do so. And going towards delivery and implementation is always done alongside developers and architects to ensure the right balance between user preferences, technological feasibility, and business viability. Our cases today will give a bit more of a tangible insight into how this all can look, as they go from really shaping their experiences to how we gear towards exploring solutions and delivering MVPs to test our concepts and also gather learnings in the real world. With this overview of info, I'll go a bit more into detail about service design. And to just put it frankly, there are many views and definitions of service design, and at times it can feel like that it sort of shifts with every new Medium article or book that comes out, and that's fine, as design should evolve. But today we're not interested in a semantic design discussion, but rather how to solve problems and deliver value in an efficient manner. So I will first attempt to give a simple outline of the different components of service design, and then get a bit more into the details. So service design really seeks to improve and design the end-to-end experience of both sides of supply and demand to ensure sustained growth. We do so with a core approach that centers around people, so everywhere from customers to employees. Designers orchestrate projects and drive change through a set of activities that allows to get deep insights about users, but also helps identify opportunities with a co-creative approach that really helps induce the alignment and adoption within organizations. Operating with this systemic mindset, service design then helps expose shortcomings in the organizational structures, but also create overview across physical and digital touchpoints to ensure that value is continuously delivered. So to understand the context that service design is situated in today, a good place to start looking is in the shift of traditional businesses and markets. Like looking at one of our clients' green wheels, where in today's experience economies, cars and the ownership of them is really shifting from being private ownership to more of a service-oriented field, where you now via an app can get locations, parking, membership, or benefits even without owning anything. This shift can be seen as a general trend from travel, personal finance, fitness, or more recently with health consultations and redesigns of in-store experiences to adapt to the new corona protocols. This means that customer behavior and their expectations of great service experiences have really changed. And companies are challenged by the pressure of shifting to offering new services, as it involves many touch points where the experience can be impacted from first basic interaction all the way to behind the scenes in the organization. Now, to look a bit at what constitutes a service, it can be seen as an arrangement between people and assets. So that can be things, benefits, resources. And to serve in this sense really means to perform or enable something over a period of time. So in a nutshell, service design revolves around activities and methods that helps define and create end-to-end experiences within this context, and thus ultimately creating services that's conducive to people's everyday rhythm where the business value really comes in. So to talk a bit more about how we practically apply service design, our initial approach always starts from the organization, and in a balanced manner, we work our way towards the user. So it's first understanding what the problem might or opportunity might be, and then frame it in a way that finds a balanced solution across the entire value chain. In more classical terms, what we're looking at is the front and the backstage, which I'm sure you have heard of as key aspects of service design. Now, we've all experienced poor service, but the reason for that problem often doesn't come from the initial visible contact point. The shortcomings behind the scenes, such as lack of collaboration or transparency between departments, are what's sometimes impacting the experience. So service design really explores and maps out the experience that the user receives, but also the conditions for how that service is performed and provided by focusing on the organization and its internal challenges. This is, in essence, to establish a shared language in an organization, which can be instrumental for internal culture, adoption, and alignment, which we will also look a bit at how important that is today. And it also allows for transparency as to how a service integrates into a company, but also helps stakeholders to uncover complications in between them and open up for discussions on how to solve problems in a more efficient manner. Now, when seeing these customer journeys and touch points and channels and stuff, you might ask, well, isn't this just design thinking? And there are many similarities in design doing approaches, but it does differ in the sense that we're here at Info at least view service design as overlapping with design thinking, in the sense that it's about empowering the user and looking to shift creative problem solving into a structured innovation approach with empathy-focused methods. But it differs in the sense that there's also systems thinking involved, in that we, through research, attempt to create models of our assumptions that can then be prototype and adjust it to see how design decisions might pan out with regards to risk and impact, which is then always measured and acted upon. This means that service design looks a bit broader at feasibility and tries to provide certainty through evidence for future business decisions. One way to explicate this a little bit more is with the principles of service design for us. So I think most of these are fairly clear and have been seen by people before. With people-centered, of course, it means that we consider the experience of everyone on both sides of supply and demand. It's co-creative in the sense that stakeholders are always engaged in the design of a service. It simply helps with better insights and quality, and also drives the transparency, as I mentioned. It's evidencing in that we conduct applied research and the right amount of it to really identify intangible values that can then be showcased through prototypes in realistic settings. And it's iterative in that it's exploratory towards implementation, thus ensuring mutually beneficial outcomes for all the parties involved. And the last one is where it deviates a bit from typical service design principles. It's systemic. We use systemic to both include that it's sequential, meaning orchestrated as a sequence and creating a visual flow of connections, but it's also holistic in the sense that it addresses needs that extends across the entire value chain. So let's get into looking at how this looks a bit more in practice. I'll soon hand it over to Joy with our first case, which is about NS Stations. NS Stations is the national railway company of the Netherlands. And what we'll be talking about is indeed transportation and mobility, but another kind, namely the pedal-powered one. NS had a vision of a multi-mobility service and using a single mobility card to swipe for multiple forms of transportation, and thus arose the OV-fiets bike rental pilot, which has been hugely successful up until now. But with an old school company providing new services, of course, comes challenges such as alignment, agility, but also technical decisions. And ultimately, the questions then remain, how can we bring the best experience not only to the customers, but also to the employees? So, Joy, let's please hear some more about this.
Yes, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. So I want to tell you a bit more about our collaboration with NS Stations by telling you a bit more about this OV-fiets service, what it's all about how our collaboration actually started. Here we will focus on the first project that we did together with NS, and where they, for the first time had experience with service design and how we practice this at Info. And last but not least, I want to dive into one of our recent projects that I did together with Kiki Den Blanke. This was a project around the service app, and we had a few challenges in here, as you can see. And I want to discuss how we face those challenges based on the service design principles mentioned earlier. But let's start off with a short introduction. I think we all have seen the OV-fiets service before, the famous blue-yellow bike. But I'm actually curious if you have any experience with renting an OV-fiets, if you've done it before. So if you want to share more about your experience, feel free to put something in the chat or connect with me afterwards, because of course you want to hear more about your thoughts. OV-fiets is a product of NS, and NS Stations is the company being responsible for this service. It's the famous bike used for the last mile of your A to B traveling. So instead of taking the metro, the bus, or the tram after your train ride, you can pick up a bike and have more freedom and flexibility, because you can pick up a bike at any moment and travel to any desired place within that bike range. It's focused mainly on business travelers, because NS thought, okay, many business travelers travel by train and need something for the last part of their traveling. But I guess right now almost everyone is using it, and you can really see that in the popularity of this service. There are currently 300 rental locations, but also more than 20,000 bikes are available. There are many subscriptions, and last year we celebrated the 5 million rides in 2019, which was an amazing achievement. I think that we were only expecting more for 2020, but as we all can see, Corona is kind of unpredictable, so we don't really know what the effects will be. Although, we all heard the news about mobility, I think, and we really have to see what this year will bring us. This popularity is also very visible in the amount of rides, as you can see in this graph. It was slowly growing at the start, but at some point between 2016 and 17, this got way more speed. This mainly was the case because of a new subscription method, but also because of adding more bikes to their fleet. Although there weren't enough bikes anymore around that time as well. And this was a trend that was visible at OV-fiets for many years. They really needed more fast and scalable software to be able to cope with this crazy amount of growth. And that was the moment when they approached us to come up with a new technical platform which would be more sufficient. But yeah, this was a super technical question, and we suggested that it might be good to do a service design track instead, and using the service design track besides creating a technical platform to construct more of a clear picture of the challenges and to see what they were actually facing. At that moment in time, we also saw a lot of Chinese bike sharing platforms popping up, and NS was really wondering if they also needed to be innovative like that. But at that moment, we decided that they had to take a step back and really see what the challenges were, what they're facing, to create a stable foundation at that moment and to be able to innovate at a later moment when they were really ready, because there were still a few challenges to tackle. This might be a bit annoying for organizations because they might need to start in a very different place, but something like this is really needed to help them to advance in the future. So our service design approach started with getting a great understanding of the context. We used many service design approaches to identify bottlenecks and construct a clear picture around the user, around the contextual parts, around the customer journey, and to get that clear picture of what was the current solution and where we could create some change. Thereby, as Sebastian already mentioned, we're not only focusing on the front stage. In service design, it's also very important to understand the backstage of a product. So we wanted to know the product from the inside out. And we took our time to really understand the motivations of our stakeholders, the business principles, and really what makes OV-fiets that good because of what their plans were. And last but not least, at Info, we're not only designing products, we're building products as well. So technology will be involved from the very start. And with a product process like this, that was really needed because a lot of this project was about creating more sufficient technology. So they were involved from the start and helped us in creating an outline of what our solution for the NS could be. In the end, we created 2 applications for all of these processes, and one of them was Frame. And Frame is a real-time statistics dashboard, which is showing the use of bicycles, the history of bike transactions, and actually all the information that the back office needed to change from a more reactive management to a more proactive one. So we provided them with new insights, with new representations, but also some new processes to be able to, instead of react on all the complaints, anticipate on it and make sure that complaints didn't need to happen. The biggest improvement, I think, was the setting up of a assignment channel, which helped them to communicate with third parties around assignments and give them the possibility to see the statuses of assignments and automatically create assignments for bikes. Back in the days, they didn't really have those insights, so it could take almost a month for a bike to be completely repaired, and they weren't always aware of where the bike was. But right now, it will only take them a week for a bike to be repaired, and that's, of course, a great opportunity, because right now, bikes will get back into the fleet way earlier, and they don't have the problem of having not enough bikes. This efficiency boost gives the back office employees actually more control and more time to dive into other matters that they didn't have the chance for before. So right now, the circulation is more quickly and they can actually focus on other tasks they couldn't. This caused that the Frame project kind of made the foundation more stable and that they became ready for innovation. And at that moment, INFOstudio asked us to join their force again and to look at the following case to start innovating. I guess most of you have seen the news. It was quite big, the coming of the smart lock system. Well, something that we figured out during our service design track was the following issue. The locking of bikes with bike keys turned out to be a big problem. And I don't know if you've ever been to Amsterdam before, but it's super important to lock your bike over there because bikes get stolen almost every day. And this is a habit of customers, which causes it almost 1,500 to 2,000 times a year, a bike key is taken home instead of left at the location. And when this is happening, it's really hard to match a key back to the bike. So locks get replaced, bikes are out of the fleet again, which costs money, but also costs a bad user experience because not enough bikes are available. Different ideas came up with smart lock systems that you could open, for instance, with your phone. But NS is a very inclusive service, so we had to keep that in mind, or they had to keep that in mind, and everyone should be able to rent an OV-fiets. Therefore, they chosen to open OV-fiets with your OV chip card and to start your rental with OV chip card. This makes sure that, for instance, elderly without a mobile phone, or you, when your battery is low, are still able to rent an OV-fiets. The locking of the bike and the unlocking will start and end rental, and this way of interacting was received quite positively during a pilot they did. But yeah, before the pilot, we already received an assignment which went close together with this. Develop an MVP service for an online service that satisfies the user needs by using a service design approach. But it was quite clear that besides this research that we would do, we had to create an MVP product or prototype as well. And that had to be built in a short time frame because it had to be ready and used with the introduction of this system, so during the pilot. And they really wanted this MVP service because they thought that using an OV chip card instead of the physical key would not be as straightforward as you might think, and that people will have a lot of questions. So an MVP service could bring more guidance, for instance, and be a place where people could ask questions or get more explanation or have personal insights. Well, we quickly saw within the planning that there was some time pressure, that we had a short period to do this, but also that we didn't have all the available resources we like to. The existing information wasn't available at the department that we're collaborating with, but at another department, and we couldn't reach out for that in the short period that we had. So now we're coming to the challenges that I've mentioned earlier that we experienced during this project. The first one was about being co-creative. At a big company like NS, employees have their own responsibilities, or a lot of responsibilities. They're very busy and super passionate about their job, but how do you make sure that they're involved in your project as well? Well, as mentioned earlier, one of the service design principles is co-creative, or as we call it, collaborative. And we don't want to claim that we are the experts in the stakeholders field. We really want to lean on their expertise and learn from their knowledge. So during a project like this, we want to align stakeholders, make sure that they're all on the same page and that they all understand the problems that they're facing. We want to get to know the business principles and make sure that they're aligned with the vision of the stakeholders, and somehow engage them and build trust, because you really want them to be aware of the problems that we discovered and that they feel responsible for the project, to be part of it and to make a change. Well, how do you start with something like that? Well, after the kickoff, Kiki and I started interviewing different stakeholders to gain more insights on their goals, their challenges, and their motivations. And we saw that the OV-fiets is a super tankable product. Of course, it's a bike, but behind this bike, there was a lot of complexity and in processes, but also in communications. There are several departments connected to this product and service, but they all have their own responsibilities. And it was sometimes hard to find out who was responsible for what, or who would be the decision maker in the end. And a stakeholder map or ecosystem map like this really helped us visualize the challenge and unclarity that we saw. At some point, this helps creating awareness, but also shows the stakeholders where they might make a change, or where things could go more smoother in the future. For us, this was very valuable because it helped us to see who we could involve in the next steps that we would take within this project. Because part of co-creation is also inviting your stakeholders to, for instance, brainstorm sessions. And within these brainstorm sessions with employees of NS, we would use cases like these to make sure that stakeholders could identify themselves with the problems that customers were facing. With this, they gained a lot of empathy. They became more engaged because they started to understand the problems and the struggles that clients were actually facing. So they started feeling the story and feeling the pain points that they had to solve. At this stage, we also try to include tech and developers as much as possible to just check in what's feasible and what our possibilities are within a certain outline. Last but not least, we also create visualizations like these to explain our story and also the findings that we have to stakeholders. This helps us in explaining, of course, and them in understanding, but in the end also helps the stakeholder to be more empowered in retelling the story to his or her stakeholders at a later moment in time. In this way, it's easier to tell this, but also to engage them by showing the evidence, showing the story that we've shared. The second challenge that we had was around the method people-centered. We were looking at the service from a customer's point of view, and we think it's very important to slip into the customer's shoes to see how the customer is experiencing the service, but also what their needs are and the motivations, the pain points, and the goals. And this way, we're able to really identify how and where in the customer journey we could step in with a solution and how we could really help the user. Because the customer communication or the direct communication wasn't based at Adyen, so the department that we were collaborating with, we weren't really able to plan in interviews or create surveys, for instance. Because of that, we had to come up with kind of creative solutions to get insights in the users in different way. So our challenge was gaining user insights without actually talking to the user. Well, together we went to the locations of the OV-fiets, the rental locations, and instead of talking to the users, we started shadowing location employees that worked over there. And we listened to the questions that users were asking the location employee to see what kind of information was missing or what the pain points were, what kind of questions the user actually had. Besides that, we went to unmanned locations to see what the pain points were over there, what kind of pain points users were experiencing, and how they would get the right information to be able to continue within the service. And we went to the customer services to actually listen to conversations that NS had with their customers and what kind of complaints they received or also questions that were asked. We also worked at a rental locations ourselves to experience what kind of questions we would receive, but also to have this bit of an interaction with the users in the end. But this really helped us to see what kind of questions and problems were experienced based on the information gathering the user would do. Last but not least, we will talk about the systemic part of service design. So NS wanted a digital solution, a service app for their physical service. And the customer journey of the OV-fiets is quite big and diverse with both physical and digital touchpoints all together. In service design, we design for the whole environment that the user operates in. So we consider all touchpoints, and of course, digital is very important, but it's not the only touchpoints that we have. So we try to look at the experience that take place over time, across all the channels and across all the touch points. And it really takes some effort to make the stakeholders aware of all these touch points and that nothing actually exists in a vacuum. So we use user flows to show the amount of touch points that the user was facing. We didn't use a service blueprint for this project because we couldn't visualize the whole backstage. We were not able to research, for instance, the other departments. So we focused on the customer journey where we would use the touch point part that you often see in a service blueprint. We divided the OV-fiets journey in smaller pieces, so it was easier to communicate, but also more tangible. And this helped us and the stakeholders to focus on and uncover certain issues for the different stages in a process that they sometimes forgotten about. So, for instance, what will happen to the user after a bike rental? Do they still want to receive information, or what information do they need? This also helped us showing how scattered the current information was and how many touch points they were actually facing right now. In that way, we could really identify where we could step in with an MVP service and where we could actually make a change and not be just another touch point to the user. Again, via some sort of storyboarding, we visualize these pain points and show how both physical and digital will come together and how the user will interact with this. And this will help to show these 4 stages again and where we can step in to make a difference. I think those were the 3 main challenges that we faced and the way we solved this with service design principles.
Thanks, Joy. That's super cool. I think there's a lot of insightful elements in there. Now, just as a reminder to people who have been joining a bit later, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and also do note that this is recorded, and you will get a version of this later on. For now, we haven't had that many questions, so allow me for this QA to just recap a little bit of some of the takeaways. I think one important thing is how to become ready for innovation. So I think some of the steps that you've been taking here with NS is really to highlight how can you make some of the issues that are causing the operational challenges really visible, and how can you create a concept of solutions to make this foundation a bit more solid. Second of all is something that's really important for service design, which is storytelling and visual artifacts. I think what you've done here is really empowered the product owners, and it really helps with constructing a clear image and giving an overview of the outcomes for a project in order to then prioritize. And thirdly, I think it's also clear that you can be adaptive with this. So staying creative while choosing your methods and how to go about, for example, contextual research if you don't have all the resources or there's a time pressure, that it really helps you by creating an overview in order to make the right priorities for which things can make some impact here. But I do have a few things I think would be interesting to talk a bit about. First of all, I'm sure some people are wondering what was actually the result of this pilot.
Yeah, so after this whole understanding phase, we created some prototypes that we validated with a few potential users. And in the end, we also created a real product, an MVP product for the introduction of this service. This was used by 30 people, I think, that were also a part of the pilot in Apeldoorn. They were randomly chosen. The only thing they had to have was an Android phone because it was currently only available for Android. I think the outcomes were quite positive. People exactly knew how to use the application. Although the main thing that we saw was that it was only an MVP, so not all the personal insights that you might expect from a service like this were integrated in this. And people are really expecting that, to have more personal information. So that's something we learned about it. But otherwise, the interactions that they had, like, for instance, showing what kind of bike you have, like the bike ID, or registering defects, everything was clear, and they really liked the interactions they had. But yeah, there's a room for improvements, and we really like that. So we learned a lot of how to continue with this project.
Well, the ambition should always be that there's room for improvement.
Yeah.
I think one other questions I do have is, so we talk a lot about collaboration and aligning, and I think it's interesting for a lot of the people today working in technology is, can you talk a bit about how you collaborated with the developers for the service app?
Yeah, so for Frame, we were actually already together with a whole team of developers. But for the service app, it was really a team of 2 designers, just Kiki and me. But it's always important to check in with developers while working on a project like this. So we try to be as much collaborative ourselves by grabbing some developers all together and check in with them around our ideas. And when we actually went to the implementation phase, we first had brainstorm sessions together with our developers to discuss our possibilities and the outlines. So we really try to be collaborative with them and include them in the designing phase as much as possible, because we think they have their own experiences and they know a lot about what's possible and what's a big challenge. So they could be a great advice in that stage as well. So that's when we invite them to help out.
Cool. Thanks, Joy. We'll get back to you when we have a bit more of a discussion in the end. For now, let's switch to the second case to see another version of how service design can be applied or help in a different challenge. And it's about Adyen. Now, some of you from the Netherlands might have heard of Adyen, but in general, it's a global payment company in fintech, and it's actually currently, at least in Bloomberg and other newsletters, been described as one of Europe's hottest tech companies. What they do is they allow businesses to accept e-commerce, mobile, or any kind of point-of-sale payments, and they've really experienced quite rapid growth. But this type of growth, of course, also means challenges. For them, one of the challenges about, how do you hire the right type of people? How do you keep in touch with the culture and make sure that the values are really ingrained. And it can be difficult to grow in a balanced manner, and still make sure that you have the right people behind you and around you. So we were asked to help with understanding how a career hub can be created based on that. And I think what's interesting is that a career hub for many people is the first impression of a company. If you might not have heard of it, this is where you really see the culture, you see the offices, you see all these things. So it's an interesting challenge, and let's hear what you did there, Laura.
Yes, let me share my screen. Okay. So, okay, thanks for the intro, Sebastian, and thank you everyone for being here today and listening to this webinar. As you introduced, I'm going to be talking about this recent challenge that we face with Adyen. My main goal today is to provide you with some inspiration about how a service design approach can help you tackle organizational challenges, but in the context of creating a digital product. So, as Sebastian already mentioned, I think it's interesting to know the context of this challenge for Adyen, but also in a global perspective, because it really helps to understand why we chose this approach and how we tackle this challenge. So Sebastian already mentioned that Adyen has grown so fast, and to give you some numbers, it means that right now they have over 1,000 employees with more than 85 nationalities, and they have offices in more than 22 different locations around the world. So international growth. So it's natural to think that within this situation of growth, there are some challenges and some processes that need some redefinition. That was the case of their career page. They really wanted to launch a career page that could serve as a unified hub, not only to attract better talent, which is eventually something that everyone wants to, but also to attract the right talent to each location and eventually at the end retain that talent as well. So when we started, we did have some challenges in place. So initial challenges that we needed to take a look into account. The first one was related to the culture, the values. Adyen is a company that is very driven by their culture. They do have this set of principle that it's called formula, and it's very intrinsic into their DNA. And they wanted us to take that formula as a backbone for the career hub. That will be the main backbone for the strategy of the career hub. The second point, it's related to the approach of service design, which is they, of course, and probably some people can relate to that. They already have a lot of ideas, a lot of assumptions in place about how this career hub will probably look like, or will be how the experience will look like. And our role here was to bring the people-centered mindset and provide with the necessary evidence to make sure that the decisions were based on current needs. And the third point is in regard how this career hub will place a role in an employee experience on an employee journey. It probably will be one of the first touch points, and it was necessary for us to take a look into that picture. As well as I mentioned, it was important for us to understand the global situation. So it was interesting to see, for example, how the relationship model in between people, applicants, and companies in regards as applying for a position in company and attracting talent, how that situation, how the relationship has evolved from a situation where companies have sometimes more power in that situation, and how nowadays it has become more a conversation in how people confronted this situation. And what is interesting here is to see how that situation has influenced companies to really invest in culture, to really invest in internal processes, and putting these things into their strategy and their priorities. Connected to this, the Career Hub will be probably the first interaction with Adyen for many people, like for the first time. So it really needed to represent not only the product, the company, the people, the culture. So the sphere of influence was bigger than just an HR processes. And with this holistic mindset into account, when we defined the approach, we knew that a service design mindset was needed in here. So in terms of process, you can see right now in this slide that we did have a double diamond, of course, adapted to the challenge and adapted to the level of information and understanding. And this was followed by an agile implementation in which we also took part. And now, a key question, or probably something that you already have in the back of your head. How does service design help on this challenge? Okay, I'm going to give you 4 main takeaways or 4 elements in which this approach was helpful, and I'm going to try to give you examples to try to put that down to earth. So the first one was in something that I briefly mentioned, the understanding of the organizational challenges. In practice, this was translated into a few things. So, for example, when we were planning the research, the discovery phase, for us was important to balance the amount of information and understanding that we had from the applicants and people point of view, because it was interesting to understand their triggers, their experiences, their motivation, but it was also important to understand the company, the culture, the values, and how they were really would like to position themselves into that conversation that I mentioned before. It was also interesting, and this is connected to the front stage, backstage position of a service design. It was interesting to scope the career hub and understand the interrelation of this element within a bigger ecosystem, and referring to the applicant journey, that it will have some interrelation with things that will happen in an earlier stage, but also afterwards, what happen after someone applies. We did have different methods to gather that understanding, but I think the interviews were one of the main sources of information. In our case, we were lucky to have access to people that has been working for Adyen for a long period, but also people that were in their first week, like onboarding the company, literally, but also people that didn't have any idea about who Adyen was. So to have like that diversity in terms of information. But as I mentioned, understanding the company was so important. So we really took some time to go into the deep understanding of, for example, the formula, how the values really impact they were working, the growth, and how they really live these things into the day-to-day activities. The second element, the second takeaway, it really helped us to create tangible definition. I mean, this is very important because in any design challenge, you need to explore, you need to diverge, but you also need to converge. We have this end goal in mind, which was to create the career hub. So we really needed to have the artifacts and the things in place in order to able to make decisions. So in our case, for example, I think personas was one of the main artifacts that really help us to make decisions. Of course, it was a deep understanding of frustration, motivation, behaviors, aspirations. For this specific project, we did have 2 main personas that were basically 2 main profiles that Adyen was really interested in knowing more about. But I think what was relevant is that by having these personas, we not only validate some problems, that we also were able to translate the needs that they had into concrete opportunities to move in a later stage to the scenarios for the design. Also, another artifact or something that was interesting in this project was to come up with design principles. Some of you maybe already can relate to your own challenges, but in this specific project, it really helped us to rationalize some of the design decision. I think it's interesting to see how at some point we also translated the design principles into different levels. So what it means in a visual point of view, for the communication, tone of voice, but also in the behavior interaction. The third point, it's about how service design really helps us to have continuous alignment. Joey mentioned that how important it is to engage and align the right people. In our case, having the right stakeholders was super important, not only because we needed to gather important information at some point, because also it was necessary to make decisions, and having the right people at the right time was crucial for us. As well as just mentioned at the beginning, this was an international challenge. It was going to be global, the career hub. So we really needed to reflect different departments, areas, but also cultures in regards to the different offices that they have around the world. So we really needed to get access to people that have a specific expertise. And I remember that, for example, within the co-creation session, this was very, very, very useful to have people from the tech department and someone that has been relocated for a different location to really translate their own vision and into concrete concepts. And the last one, it's about that need that sometimes you have. I mean, in any design challenge, you need to be adaptable. And I think Sebastian mentioned this as one of the principles in regards to the iteration. But you really need to have an approach that help you to adapt to the different circumstances and needs. In our case, this was translated into continuous experimentation. I mean, I remember that, for example, at some point when we were concepting some of the first ideas of the Career Hub, we really have a lot of questions and assumptions that we really wanted to test. So we really jumped into high-end prototypes very, very, very fast, and we did a lot of iteration in that area. So we really adapt ourselves in terms of process, but also in terms of how to move quickly to the next stage. And the last one, I think probably this is something that everyone can relate today. The circumstances, having a flexible approach help you to not anticipate, because we cannot see the future, sadly, but to really adapt yourself and to a new circumstances very quickly. In our case, with the COVID-19, with the corona, it has really influenced and impacted the way of working and how we work in any situation. And in our case, we were finishing this project when all this situation happened. So you can imagine that some of the last iteration, the last things that we wanted to do as we planned, it was not possible. It was impossible. But it was nice to have this mindset and this approach that was feasible and that was flexible enough to readapt to the circumstance that we successfully ended up. And that's it. This is the Career Hub. I encourage you to visit it. It's been live for 2 weeks. The URL is careers.adyen.com. Please go ahead. Any feedback is more than welcome. Adyen is a very nice company to work with, by the way. And yeah, I think that's all. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop right now.
Thanks, Laura. Great. So again, I think what's really interesting about this case is that even though on the surface it seems like more of a product design challenge, the service design mindset really helped identify values and culture as a driving force for rethinking this applicant experience. And I think a nice takeaway is also that you're able to situate the Career Hub at the center of an ecosystem that then can point to how it affects employee branding strategy, but also employee experience, as well as values and internal communication. And just one question out of the gate. So can you tell me how this solution had then improved that journey of the applicants?
Oh, yeah, a good one. So at the beginning, I mentioned that this process of getting into a company and companies attracting talent has become a conversation. I mean, like in any relationship, is a mutual match, and that
Can you come back on the camera also, maybe?
Oh,
would
yes.
Be so nice.
I think I have my camera turned on. Is it?
Oh, okay. I cannot see you. That's fine.
You cannot see me? Okay.
No, I can only see Joy.
Oh, so sorry that you missed me. Yeah, I was saying that it's a conversation, it's a relationship, and any relationship, it needs to be a mutual match. So this has influence in how people really need to know upfront before applying for a position, what the culture is, what the way of working is, trying to picture themselves working there and seeing, okay, do I see myself working in this company? What happened before we did the Career Hub is that in most cases, people just jump it into the end of the funnel, like applying with the CV and the motivation without having the opportunity to discover that information up front. So it was up to you to contact someone working in the company or trying to find that information in an article or somewhere else. And right now what we are trying to manage is that information in context. So if you really want to know that up front, you can do it. If you want to know that after applying, you can find that information, and it's in a more consistent and easy way to find it.
Cool. Okay, I was thinking maybe asking a question for both of you, which I think one of the interesting things in both of your cases is aligning stakeholders. And let's start with Joy. Joy, do you have like a tip for how to align stakeholders in your experience?
Oh, yeah, I think, well, what I kind of mentioned during the presentation was that visualization really helps in aligning stakeholders, making sure that there's a visualization that everyone understands, and also ask them to tell you the story by using that visualization to see if they have the same understanding of that, and really including them in brainstorms, making sure that they're all at the same table. Very often I've seen that certain stakeholders have never talked to each other, and bringing them in the same room, already making sure that they start discussing certain issues, creates aligning. So include them as much as possible, and try to give them that empowerment that they most of the time need.
Cool.
Maybe I can also add something on top of that. It's a tip, I think, and this is something that we did with Adyen. We took some time before the kickoff, before starting the project, that normally we call it orientation week, to understand the organization and measure who really needed to be involved in this project. Sometimes the first stakeholders that came up in a session are not necessarily the ones that will influence eventually the decision and will have all the knowledge. So I think it's good to have the time to really understand and map the stakeholders, as one of the things that Joy mentioned and shows in the NS case, but also understanding that sometimes aligning stakeholders probably it can be very successfully. You have people that can engage them and can help you through that engagement. In our case, for example, having the product owner since the very beginning, very, very involved, which normally it's someone that is going to be part of the implementation at the end of the phase. In our case, he was there since the beginning, and he really helped us in those sessions and trying to engage the right people and getting access to the right stakeholders.
Great. Okay, guys. So this concludes the discussion part. I'm just gonna quickly try and summarize a few of these elements. And to sum up today, through the cases of Adyen and OV-fiets, we've really seen how service design aligns us at Info to really allow for deep insights about front and backstage experiences in a really people-centric manner, but also with the systemic approach that we mentioned. I think it's nice to see how it not only helps identify opportunities by looking at the full scope, but has this co-creative approach that really means establishing strong alignment in a collaborative manner within the organizations, and really helps deliver value. So we've seen today how companies are having to adapt to providing services in new ways. And the challenges of offering these sometimes expose shortcomings that can happen within the organization or technical challenges. And in general, service design helps to create that overview. So this concludes the INFOStudio for today. Please, if you have any questions, please send them to our emails. We're really happy to answer. And besides that, please look at info on LinkedIn, where we will post a link in the chat. And we're going to be asking recommendations for what people are interested in seeing as a next subject for a webinar about design, if there are things we should go more into detail with, or other aspects that are interesting. And furthermore, keep an eye on the schedule on the INFOStudio page for upcoming webinars. So with that being said, thanks for attending, and thanks for your questions and listening today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.